I've always been dead weight, Dad. Sign the papers and disappear. That's all we're asking. Those were my daughter's exact words on the morning of my 68th birthday. Not happy birthday, not come in, Dad, we made breakfast. Just that. Sign and disappear. Delivered through a half-open front door while I stood on her porch in the November cold, holding the Tim Hortons coffee I'd brought as a peace offering because that's the kind of fool I was. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer with the City of Ottawa, mostly working on infrastructure projects, bridges, transit underpasses, the kind of work that holds a city together without anyone noticing it's there. I retired at 65 with a modest pension, a house I'd paid off in full in Orleans, and a storage unit full of my late wife's things I still couldn't bring myself to sort through. My wife, Diane, died of ovarian cancer 4 years ago. It took her fast, 14 months from diagnosis to the last morning I held her hand. We had one daughter together, Melissa. I used to think Melissa was the best thing I'd ever built. I know how that sounds, sentimental old man stuff, but I believed it completely. When she was small, she used to sit beside me at the kitchen table while I drafted on graph paper and ask me what all the little numbers meant. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh, and what I thought was a version of my own stubbornness, the good kind, the kind that gets you through hard winters and longer grief. I don't know exactly when she changed. Maybe she didn't change so much as reveal herself gradually, the way a foundation problem doesn't announce itself until the crack in the wall gets wide enough that you can't pretend it's settlement anymore. After Diane died, I invited Melissa and her husband Craig to move in temporarily. Their lease was up. Craig had just switched jobs. It made sense on paper. I told them 6 months, a year at most. 3 years later, they were still there, and the house, my house, the house Diane and I had paid for with 30 years of combined work, had quietly become theirs in every way except legally. That word, legally, became the sticking point. I should describe Craig so you understand. He's the kind of man who has a confident answer for everything and is wrong about most of it. He renovated my basement without asking me, knocked out a wall between the laundry room and the storage area, and presented the finished result with the satisfaction of someone doing me a favor. When I said I wished he'd consulted me first, he looked at me the way you look at a dog that's wandered into the wrong yard. Melissa said, "Dad, he worked so hard on that. I let it go. I let a lot of things go in those years because I told myself Diane would have wanted peace in the family. Diane would have thrown them both out inside a week. I know that now." The house in Orleans was assessed at just under $840,000 that autumn. Craig had apparently done his research because suddenly, around the time of that assessment, the conversation started shifting. "Why don't you downsize, Dad? A smaller place would be easier to maintain. You'd have money freed up. You could travel. I'm 68, not 90. I walk 4 kilometers every morning along the river path. I shoveled my own driveway that winter without asking anyone. I didn't need to be managed. But the conversations kept coming. Different angles, same destination. Craig mentioned a nice condo development in Kanata, then a seniors community in Barhaven. Independent living, he called it. Very nice, very modern. Then Melissa started talking about power of attorney, how it would just make things simpler, Dad, just practical, just in case something happened. "Nothing's going to happen," I said. "You don't know that," she said. I started writing things down around that time. Not because I suspected anything specific, more because I'm an engineer and we document. I kept a small notebook in the pocket of my fleece vest, the green one I wear around the house, and I jotted dates, conversations, specific words. I don't know why exactly. Some part of me was reading the load on the structure and didn't like the numbers. The birthday ambush, that's the only word for it, happened on a Tuesday. Melissa called the week before and said she and Craig wanted to take me to dinner, somewhere nice, my choice. I said the Whalesbone on Kent Street because Diane and I used to go there for anniversaries. Melissa said, "Perfect, we'll pick you up at 7. They picked me up at 7. We did not go to the Whalesbone. Craig drove east out of the city on the 417 until I recognized the exit. A complex I'd driven past before. Beige buildings set back from the road behind a decorative gate. A sign reading, "Riverside Gardens, Retirement Living." I thought Craig had taken a wrong turn. He hadn't. Melissa got out of the car before I could say anything and came around to open my door. She was wearing the same expression she'd worn at Diane's funeral. Controlled, practiced. I'd mistaken it for grief then. I recognized it now as something else entirely. "Dad, we want to show you something. Come inside." "I want to go to dinner, Melissa." "We just want you to see the place. It's really lovely. Just look." I should have gotten back in the car. Instead, like the fool I apparently was, I followed my daughter through those glass doors because I still believed, somewhere underneath everything that had been accumulating, that she was my child and she loved me, and this was a misunderstanding I could talk my way out of. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. A woman at the reception desk greeted us by my name, which told me the appointment had been made in advance. A man in a navy blazer joined us, introduced himself as a residence coordinator, and began walking us down a hallway toward a suite that had, I noticed, a small printed card already slipped into the door holder with the name G. Whitmore on it. I stopped walking. "What is this, Melissa?" "Dad, what is this?" Craig stepped forward with his hands in his pockets, the posture of a man who has rehearsed. "Gerald, we've been worried about you. You've had 2 incidents this year where you left the stove on. You forgot your doctor's appointment in September. We think this is the right—" "I have never left the stove on. I said it quietly, which is how I say things when I'm actually serious. I forgot one appointment in September because I had the flu and I called to reschedule." Melissa's voice softened in a way that made my stomach turn. "Dad, we've spoken to a doctor. There are some concerns." "You spoke to a doctor about me. We're trying to protect you." And there it was. The same sentence, I'm sure, that has been used on every stubborn father in every similar hallway in every retirement complex in this country. "We are trying to protect you." Said with just enough genuine-sounding tenderness to make you feel like the unreasonable one for resisting. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, at the familiar eyes and the unfamiliar face she was wearing behind them. Then I looked at the card on the door with my name on it. Then I looked at Craig, who was studying the middle distance. I turned around and walked back to the lobby. I pushed through the glass doors into the November air, which was cold and real and mine. I stood on the sidewalk outside Riverside Gardens with nowhere to go because Craig had driven and I hadn't thought to bring my wallet. Melissa had said it was dinner. I hadn't thought to bring anything, and I called the only person I could think to call. His name is Frank Okafor. We met in 1989 on a job site in Nepean, both of us junior engineers on a drainage project that ran 8 months over schedule and became the thing we joked about for 30 years afterward. Frank retired 2 years before I did and had been running a small consulting practice out of his home in Westboro. He answered on the second ring. "I'm standing outside a retirement home in the East End, and my daughter drove me here under false pretenses and then left me," I said. A pause. Frank is not a dramatic man. He said, "Give me 40 minutes. He was there in 35. On the drive back to his house, I told him everything. The slow accumulation of it, the power of attorney conversations, the condo suggestions, the birthday dinner that wasn't a birthday dinner. Frank listened the way good engineers listen, without interrupting, storing everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Gerald," he said, "the house is worth close to $1 million. I know. And Craig knows that. Obviously." He drove. We passed through Vanier, through Sandy Hill, over the bridge. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to understand the full extent of it," I said, "before I do anything." Frank's sister, Patricia, is a real estate lawyer in the Glebe. I'd met her at Frank's retirement party. 2 days after the birthday incident, Frank contacted her on my behalf and explained the situation. She agreed to meet quietly, billed at a reduced rate as a favor, and what she found when she began quietly investigating shook me more than I'd expected. Craig had contacted a real estate agent 6 weeks earlier, not to list the property, not yet, but to discuss the process of listing it, what documents would be required, what my signature would need to look like on what forms. The agent, a straightforward woman named Brenda Zabo, who became appalled when Patricia explained the context, provided a written account of that conversation willingly. There was more. Melissa had visited Service Ontario and made inquiries about the process for becoming a substitute decision-maker for a parent assessed as incapable. The staff member she spoke with, following protocol, had logged the inquiry. Patricia obtained that record. And then there was the doctor. Melissa had consulted a walk-in clinic physician, not my own GP, not anyone who had ever met me, and described, according to the clinic notes, a parent showing signs of cognitive decline. Forgetting appointments, leaving appliances on, becoming confused during conversations. The physician, without examining me, had written a brief note expressing concern and suggesting formal assessment. This note was what Craig had been referring to when he said, "We've spoken to a doctor." I sat with all of that for several days. I had moved into Frank's spare room, which he offered without ceremony the night he picked me up. His house is a semi-detached in Westboro, modest, full of books, and the smell of the jollof rice he makes on Sunday afternoons. I slept better in that spare room than I had in my own house in months. That told me something. I did not contact Melissa. I did not contact Craig. I went back to the notebook in my vest pocket and I wrote down everything Patricia had found, every date, every detail. And then I opened a new page and I wrote at the top, in my engineer's block print, "What does a complete response look like?" Frank's daughter, Amara, is 24 and studies law at the University of Ottawa. She's serious and precise the way her father is, and she had opinions about my situation that she delivered over Sunday dinner with a directness I found refreshing. She said, "Mr. Whitmore, what they're describing, fabricated incapacity concerns, coordinated consultation with a lawyer and a physician without your knowledge, an attempt to place you in residential care without consent, if documented properly, that's elder financial abuse under the criminal code. It's not a gray area." I asked her what proper documentation looked like. She told me. Over the following weeks, while Melissa sent careful text messages asking how I was doing and whether I'd thought more about their concerns, I was methodically building what I can only describe as a case file. Frank and I met with Patricia twice more. My own family doctor, Sandra Vaux, conducted a full cognitive assessment and wrote a thorough letter confirming that my mental function was entirely intact. She was quietly furious when I explained the walk-in clinic note. "That's not how this process works," she said. "This is not how any of this works." My old colleague from the city, Tom Beauchamp, wrote a statutory declaration describing our ongoing chess correspondence we've played by email for 12 years, and his observations of my reasoning and memory over that time. My neighbor on Beausoleil Drive, Helen, wrote 1-2 unprompted when I explained what had happened. She'd suspected something was wrong for months, she said. She'd seen Craig taking photos of the property exterior from different angles, measuring the front walk. I learned things I wished I didn't have to know. Craig had made a cash withdrawal of $6,000 from a joint account he and Melissa held, likely to cover whatever preliminary legal consultation they'd done. He'd been researching the retirement market for months. Amara found his search history through some means I didn't ask too many questions about. He had spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, projecting their net position after the sale of my house, factoring in his salary and Melissa's part-time income, modeling scenarios. One column was labeled after Gerald. I read that once, and then I put it face down on the table. There was a Thursday evening in early January, 3 months after the birthday incident, when I sat in Frank's kitchen while he made tea, and I said out loud, "I could just go to the police right now. Patricia says there's enough." Frank set 2 mugs on the table and sat down. "You could," he said. "But..." He waited. "But if I do it now," I said. "Craig denies everything. Melissa cries and says there was a misunderstanding and she was just worried about me. The walk-in clinic note is ambiguous enough that a good lawyer makes something of it. I get the house back, maybe. They get a scare. Nothing actually changes in the way they understand what they did." Frank wrapped both hands around his mug. He's known me long enough to know when I'm thinking out loud versus asking a question. "I want them to go far enough," I said, "that there's no way to call it a misunderstanding." He nodded slowly. So we waited. In February, Melissa filed a formal application with the Consent and Capacity Board of Ontario to have me assessed as incapable of managing property. She used the walk-in note and a declaration she'd written herself, describing incidents of confusion, aggression, forgetting. The application named Craig as the proposed substitute decision-maker. Patricia had anticipated this. She had already prepared a response package, Dr. Wo's assessment, the statutory declarations, bone records showing my consistent and coherent communication over the preceding months, and a detailed account from Frank describing my functioning during the weeks I'd lived with him. The response was filed within 48 hours. The board assessor, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Margaret Chen, came to Frank's home for our interview. She spent 2.5 hours with me. At the end, she shook my hand and said, "Mr. Whitmore, I'll have my report to the board within 10 days. Her expression told me enough. 3 weeks later, the board issued its finding: Gerald Whitmore is capable of managing property and personal care. The application was dismissed. The same week, Patricia filed a formal complaint with the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons regarding the walk-in clinic physician who had written the note without examination. Separately, she submitted a detailed report to the Ottawa Police Service's Elder Abuse Unit. I'm going to pause here for a moment, because what happened next is the part I find hardest to describe without sounding like I'm settling scores. I'm not. Or at least that's not the main thing. But I want to be honest about it. When the police contacted Melissa and Craig for an interview, Craig called me. Not Melissa, Craig. He called my cell number, which I had changed, and somehow got the new one, which told me he'd been tracking it through the family plan we'd all shared, until I'd quietly removed myself from it the month before. He left a voicemail. His voice was a version I hadn't heard before, a stripped-down version, without the confidence and the home renovation energy and the spreadsheet certainty. He said he and Melissa just wanted to talk. That everything had been misunderstood, that they'd been worried, genuinely worried, and had maybe gone about things the wrong way. I played that message 3 times. I didn't call back. Patricia responded on my behalf through formal channels. My granddaughter, Craig and Melissa's daughter, is 16. Her name is Nadia, and she has her grandmother Diane's eyes too, which is one of those things that catches you off guard at unexpected moments. Nadia texted me from her school account in March. "Grandpa, I don't know what's happening, but I know it's bad, and I know you didn't do anything wrong. Can I call you?" We talked for 40 minutes. She heard her parents arguing for weeks, had seen her father on his laptop late at night, had noticed her mother crying at the kitchen table. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew the shape of it. Kids always know the shape. I told her the truth and the version appropriate for a 16-year-old, that some adults make choices that hurt people they should protect, and that it wasn't her fault and didn't change how much I loved her, and that she should keep going to school and keep being the thoughtful person she already was, and let the grown-ups handle the grown-up problems. She said, "Okay, Grandpa, but promise me you're fine." "I'm fine," I told her. "I promise." She said, "I made you a birthday card in September, but I forgot to give it to you. I still have it." I said, "I'd like that very much." In April, Craig and Melissa's lawyer reached out to Patricia proposing what he called a resolution framework. This is lawyer language for they want to make it go away. The proposal involved me dropping the police complaint in exchange for a signed commitment that Craig and Melissa would vacate my property within 60 days and make no further claims on it. I asked Patricia what she thought. She said, "It's your decision, Gerald, but you should know that the police file is already in motion and the Crown will decide whether to proceed regardless of your position. You can drop your cooperation. You can't drop their investigation." I thought about it for a week. I walked the river path every morning, watched the ice break up in the Ottawa, watched the city thaw and go green again the way it does every year, reliable as load calculations. And I kept coming back to the same place. I didn't want to destroy my daughter. I want to be clear about that. In the same way that Andrew Carter was clear about it in another story someone told somewhere, though I didn't have the benefit of his example when I was living through mine. What I wanted was for Melissa to understand, with complete clarity and no ambiguity, what she had done and what it had cost, not just to me, to Nadia, to whatever version of herself she still had access to underneath Craig and the spreadsheets and the After Gerald column. I agreed to a partial resolution. Craig and Melissa would vacate the property. They would sign a formal acknowledgement that all prior discussions regarding power of attorney and residential placement were conducted without my consent and are null and void. They would make no claim on the property or any of my assets. In exchange, I would provide a statement to the Crown expressing that I considered the matter resolved from my personal perspective, not withdrawing anything, just providing context. The Crown could make their own decision. Patricia negotiated one additional condition that I had requested specifically. Melissa would agree to attend, at her own cost, 6 sessions with a registered social worker specializing in elder family dynamics, not as punishment, as something to do with the wreckage. Melissa agreed to all of it. She didn't speak to me directly until the following month, a Sunday in May, when she appeared at Frank's door alone. No Craig. She looked like someone who had spent winter inside a hard realization and come out the other side of it still walking but changed. I don't know how else to describe it. I made coffee. We sat at Frank's kitchen table because Frank had tactfully taken himself out for a walk. She didn't try to explain. That was the thing that surprised me most. She didn't offer me a story about how it was Craig's idea, or how she'd been scared, or how the grief after Diane had turned things sideways in her in ways she hadn't understood. She might have been able to say all of those things, and some of them might even have been true, but she didn't. She said, "Dad, I don't know how to ask you to forgive me." I said, "Then don't yet, let's just sit here." We sat. I refilled her coffee. Outside the kitchen window, a cardinal was doing something in the cedar hedge, that specific red against the green that always makes me think of December. I said, "Melissa, your mother would not recognize what you tried to do." She put her face in her hands. I let her. I didn't move toward her and I didn't move away. I just let the silence hold what it needed to hold, which is something I think I've gotten better at since Diane died. Grief teaches you that not every silence needs to be filled. After a while, she looked up, eyes red, and she said, "Is there any way back?" I thought about Nadia saying she still had the birthday card. I thought about the river path and the ice breaking up. I thought about Frank, 35 minutes without being asked. I said, "I don't know yet, but you showing up here instead of sending a lawyer is probably the beginning of finding out." She nodded. That was enough for that Sunday. I moved back into my house in June. Craig was gone. Melissa had asked him to leave, which I hadn't anticipated and hadn't asked for, but which told me something about what those social worker sessions were doing. The house felt strange at first, like coming back to a building that had been through something while you were away and shows it in small ways you have to look for. I repainted the bedroom. I replaced the kitchen tap, which had been dripping since October and which nobody had thought to fix. I put Diane's things back in the places they'd been before I'd moved them aside to make room for Craig's presence. Frank came for dinner the following weekend. Amara came too, and Nadia, who had asked her mother's permission and received it. We had roast chicken, the way Diane used to make it, which I'd finally learned to replicate after 4 years of trying. We sat around my own table in my own kitchen, and Frank told the story of the Nepean drainage project, the 8-month overrun, the site manager who'd cried when the inspector showed up, and everyone laughed. I watched Nadia laugh at a story that happened before she was born, at a table that would be hers someday, in a house that had held 30 years of a life I'd built piece by piece, and I thought, this is what was worth protecting. Not the money, not the $840,000, and whatever it will be worth when I'm gone. The table, the chicken, the cardinal in December, the birthday card a 16-year-old girl kept for 8 months because she hadn't given up on the connection it represented. The Crown eventually decided not to proceed with charges, citing my statement and the resolution framework and the lack of completed fraud. Craig received a formal caution. It's on file. It follows him. Whether he understands what he almost did or what he actually did, I don't know. That's no longer my problem to solve. What I know is this. I am 68 years old and I walk 4 kilometers every morning and I play chess by email and I make roast chicken on Sundays and I sleep in my own bedroom with the window cracked the way I like it. I spent 31 years building things designed to hold weight, to flex under stress, to outlast the people who built them. I know what a sound structure looks like. The one I'm living in now, cautious, open-windowed, Sunday chicken, Nadia's voice on the phone. I think it might be the most solid thing I've ever made. I still think about that parking lot. November cold, no wallet, no phone charger. My daughter's taillight's already gone. I'd walked out of that retirement home lobby on my own two legs, which felt important at the time, though I couldn't have told you exactly why. Maybe because walking out on your own is about the only thing that's entirely yours in a moment when everything else has been arranged without you. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it over these months, is that what happened to me wasn't random. It grew from something I'd allowed to grow, slowly, the way a small crack in a concrete slab becomes something structural if you keep filling it with filler instead of addressing the cause. I'd loved my daughter in a way that confused protecting her from difficulty with actually helping her become someone capable of facing it. Every time I smoothed things over, every time I said it's fine when it wasn't, I was building a version of her that didn't have to reckon honestly with much of anything. That's on me. I'm not saying it excuses what she did, but I understand now that genuine love requires the honesty to let people feel the weight of their choices, not just the comfort of being caught before they fall. The thing that saved me wasn't luck, though Frank showing up in 35 minutes felt like it at the time. What saved me was that I had spent 31 years developing the habit of thinking clearly under pressure, of documenting carefully, of not acting on the first impulse when the situation called for a longer view. Those aren't gifts you're born with. They're built, repetition by repetition, over a working life. When Craig said we've spoken to a doctor, and I felt the rage rise up in me, something quieter underneath it said, write it down, think it through. Don't move until you understand the full structure of what you're dealing with. That quieter voice was the result of decades of practice. I am grateful for every boring Tuesday it took to develop it. And then there's Nadia, 16 years old, texting me from her school account because she'd already decided on her own, using whatever moral compass she'd managed to build inside a household that wasn't always pointing true north, that her grandfather hadn't done anything wrong. I don't take credit for that. But I think about what it means. That even in circumstances designed to isolate and diminish a person, one honest relationship, tended carefully over years, can become the thing that breaks through. She kept a birthday card for 8 months. That's not nothing. That's a person who understands, instinctively, that connection matters more than convenience. If there's anything I'd want someone watching this to carry with them, it's that. The quality of your character is the only thing that cannot be filed away in a legal application or signed over to someone else. The clarity to see what's actually happening around you, not what you wish were happening, that's worth developing every single day. And the willingness to keep going when the person who is supposed to love you has made it very hard. That's not stubbornness. That's the thing that gets you back to your own kitchen, your own table, roast chicken on a Sunday, a granddaughter's laugh. It's enough. It's more than enough.